I am so excited to have Dr. Amy Apigian with us today. Hi, Dr. Amy. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Betsy. It's so good to be here.
So I wanted to get into, you specialize in trauma. And like when I first heard this about you, I thought my thought of trauma was my trauma rotation I did at my surgery residency, which is completely not. what
I
it
think
is.
it's been trauma for you.
Yeah. Oh, that rotation definitely was traumatic. So yeah, what is it that you do and how did you get here?
So what I do is I'm the medical expert on trauma in the body. And so we've misunderstood trauma and we've always kind of thought that, oh, trauma becomes our psychology. We need to work with our thoughts, our brain, our memories around trauma. And I come along and say, actually, no, we've really misunderstood it. And trauma is something that the body goes through. It's a body experience. It's actually a state of our nervous system, one of the 3 states of our nervous system. And so that's where the work needs to be, is actually working with the body, working with the nervous system, and how that has affected our biology. So the downstream effects of that trauma, but then we can even look at what biology may a person have that actually predisposes them to having trauma in life. So there's a lot there, and I get really excited about talking about, my model and methodology, the biology of trauma, because it's been a missing piece for so many people who have just been looking at the psychology piece of trauma.
Yeah, that is so incredibly important. So you were just talking about that there's 3 states of the body. What are those?
Yeah, so the 3 states of the nervous system, who knew?
Oh,
And
yeah.
the states are, parasympathetic state is one of them. And this is a state that many people are familiar with, perhaps more under the terms of the rest and digest state, the social engagement or social connection. And this is where our body is naturally at its healthiest. It's not something that we have to force. It's not something that we have to think about. We don't have to do affirmations or mantras. It just flows. And then there's the stress response. So the stress response is actually what our body goes into in the response to a threat, whether that's a real threat or a perceived threat, doesn't matter. It's just a threat. And so our body goes into the stress response that gets communicated through the sympathetic chain that runs down our spine. And it sends out adrenaline and then cortisol and really sets our body in motion to take action. It needs to mobilize us. And it does that with those hormones. But then we have this trauma response, and there's a couple different names for it, depending on who you've been hanging around or what books you've been reading. So you may know it as the freeze response. You may know it as the dorsal vagal response if you've been studying the polyvagal theory. And what happens is that the moment that there's a trigger that takes a person from that stress response to this trauma response, and now instead of the primary communication happening down the sympathetic chain, the primary communication is happening through the vagus nerve, but not the parasympathetic vagus nerve. This is actually coming from the dorsal nucleus, or a separate section of the root of that nerve. And rather than communicating social engagement, all is well, safe and secure, let me just hug everyone, it's communicating, we don't know if we're going to make it. We actually don't know if we're going to make it. So we need to shut everything down, conserve our energy, go into hibernation. We don't want to feel physical pain. We don't want to feel emotional pain. So we kind of just feel numb. We feel flat, and we just go through the motions and get through. And that's the trauma response, or this dorsal vagal or freeze response. So those are the 3 states of our nervous system. Things that I did not learn in medical school, by the way.
I was going to say, I just learned something because I had no clue, because I had been lumping that freeze in with the sympathetic. And I'm like, ooh.
And that's still the common saying, oh, fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm like, actually, that fight or flight is one state. That's the stress state. That freeze is a completely different physiology and biology that's happening in the body. Completely different. Like they could not be more polar opposites.
Oh my God, that is so incredibly fascinating. And now I kind of want to get into, because I know we have limited time and I want to cover everything, which we could probably talk to you for hours about your biology of trauma. Like, what is that? What do we need to know?
So with the biology of trauma, we need to understand that once that trauma response happens, there are lasting effects on our biology. And it leaves footprints in our health. Some of those don't show immediately. And yet, by the time that we're an adult, if we've had this trauma pattern that is playing itself out and now our programming in our daily life, then we can start to see daily changes in our physical health that indicate to us like, oh, my body just went into a trauma response. So the difference between stress and trauma, we can actually see in our health. Stress will actually shut inflammation down. Most people, and I was certainly taught this as well, that, oh my goodness, stress causes inflammation. That's wrong. So when we look at adrenaline, when we look at cortisol, they shut inflammation down. And that's why if you're having a flare up of your asthma or whatever other inflammation-based symptom, guess what they give you? They give you a form of cortisol, prednisone, steroids to shut the inflammation down. So it's not the stress, it's actually that freeze response or that trauma response. That's what causes the chronic inflammation, which is at the root of most of our chronic health conditions. And so that is a big piece of this biology of trauma that we can't just then go to therapy and talk about what happened to us in our past and expect our body to be able to resolve the effects of a trauma. We actually need to be looking at what is the burden, what is the damage that our body is still carrying, and address that, come in and support that. And then it can unlock so many levels of healing that we haven't been able to experience yet.
This is just kind of really brings together this whole body, mind, spirit is with what we talk about here in this show. I don't even know where to start asking questions because you've like really like going, wait a minute, I need to relook at things because this is totally different than how I've been taught and how I've been looking at things the last couple of years. But it makes sense. Like now that you say it, I'm going to go, wow, you're right. So what?
And that's what I found. So here I was like, going through medical school. I did my training at Loma Linda University. And then from there, I went into a general surgery residency where I was working with the human body. I mean, how much closer can you get than surgery, right? Like you're working with the human body. And when I got really sick and I had to figure things out and figure what was the driver for my chronic health conditions, I had to unlearn so much of what I thought I knew about the human body and relearn it through these 3 states of the nervous system. And once I saw this playing out in my own health, and I started to piece together different things that I was learning from the different trauma therapies that I was going to help my son and now other families that I was helping, it just started to click like, wait a second, like this, we've been taught wrong about actually how the human body works and the different states that it has, where it does have a stress state and it has this completely other state that we haven't understood. And so we've overlooked it. And I want to say even misdiagnosed a lot of people, misdiagnosed people saying, oh, you're stressed, or even better, you have chronic stress, or even better, let's call it burnout. You're burnt out. And not realizing that with that misdiagnosis, we have missed the trauma and we're missing the tools that they really should be applying in their life for the trauma piece.
And when I hear the word trauma, sometimes I also think like of like things that have really happened really bad in someone's lives, but it doesn't always have to be some catastrophic emotional event. So what triggers that trauma? Like
there's two things that trigger a trauma response. Too much, too fast. Too little for too long. And that's it. We try to complicate things by saying, oh, well, was it an event? What kind of an event was it? Was that a big T trauma? Was that a little T trauma? And we really can bring it back down to what is the body experiencing? Because the minute that the body goes from that stress response, which is a high energy, I got this, I'm going to still run for all I got, I'm going to give it all I've got, to I give up. This is too much. I can't do this anymore. That's the trauma. So it has nothing to do with what the event is. And there's many times that we experience a trauma response and there was no event. It was something that we thought of that put us back into that state of, I can't do this anymore. or I don't want to get out of bed. Those are all thoughts and features of the trauma response. And we haven't known how to recognize it. And we haven't realized that there are many times throughout sometimes our day where our body is going into this trauma response because we're still looking for this big event. And it's not the big event, it's how your body is responding to real life situations.
Oh my God, this is amazing. And I can't wait to talk to you more about this when we come back from the commercial break.
80% of women will develop a pelvic health condition at some point in their lives. There is relief. There is hope. The Pelvic Floor Store, your resource for personal health.
All right, we are back with Dr. Amy Apigian, and we are talking about trauma, which is absolutely fascinating, the stuff that she's been telling us. So, Dr. Amy, what are the kind of symptoms that people get, or the illnesses that someone get that may be like recognized as, all right, I'm having some kind of trauma response?
When I first started looking at this, it was when I got sick, and here I am, 31 years old, supposed to be young and healthy. Yes, I'm in the middle of general surgery residency. So yes, I've been working hard and long hours, not as great of sleep, but the symptoms that I was having, which were, I'm overweight, I'm definitely anxious, I'm depressed, I'm on 2 mood medications though, so that should be taking care of it, right? And I'm also experiencing such severe fatigue, and it got so bad that I couldn't get out of bed for a period of time. And when I looked at those symptoms, those were the ones that I recognized at the time. Once I started digging into it, I'm like, oh no, I've got so many more things that I've been ignoring for years. But those were the things that I felt broke my body. When I saw those, it triggered me to think of what I had learned about the adverse childhood experiences. And the studies coming out of that work that started in 1980 at an obesity clinic of all places at the Kaiser San Diego with Dr. Vincent Folletti, and realizing that there was this connection between adverse events in childhood and adult diseases, and everything that I had related to that. And yet I would not have looked back at my childhood and said, oh, I had trauma. And so it really made me lean into it and ask, well, then why is this my body? What am I missing that my body can still have all of that stuff that someone else's body should have that had all that childhood trauma? And yet when we look at kind of how we've been thinking of our diseases, we have always related them to stress. And so when I started looking into, wait a second, what is this connection between the adverse childhood experiences and adult onset diseases? I learned that it wasn't stress, it was the trauma response. And the trauma response is what eventually yields these different diseases. So autoimmune condition. Autoimmune conditions are a feature of the trauma response in the body. So much so that we can see someone who's has an active autoimmune condition and say, we don't know why, but your body is in the trauma response. Now, it may be that the trauma response generated the autoimmunity, or that the autoimmunity generated the trauma response. We don't know yet. Certainly at this point, it's feeding off of each other. But I have also never met a person who did not have that trauma response develop autoimmunity. They always have had that in place before. They just maybe didn't recognize it. Chronic pain is another condition that is squarely in that trauma response. Chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, acne, eczema, these types of skin conditions. These are all related to the trauma response. IBS. IBS is actually not stress. IBS is actually the going back and forth between the trauma response and the stress response. It's the rapid cycling of the states of the nervous system that then generate all those problems in the digestive system. So certainly we can look at anxiety, depression, and those things, but just the physical health conditions, for me as a medical physician, blew my mind when I realized that I could actually look at a person's health history and see trauma in their body without ever having even talked with them. I started to see patterns until it became very predictable. And when I actually then finally did meet with them, it's like I knew exactly what questions to ask. And I almost could predict what kind of answers they would have to my questions because it was so closely and always connected with that trauma response and feeling overwhelmed. I'm thinking of Kelsey, and she's actually someone who has come in through my 21-day journey program. And I didn't know this at the time. She grew up with her mom being an alcoholic. And by the time she was 15, she felt that she had completely lost her own voice, completely lost her ability to have a voice, to be seen, to be independent. Everything felt like it just was controlled by mom. And by age 22, guess what she's diagnosed with? Hypothyroidism, an autoimmune condition. So this is one story, but I see these patterns where that overwhelm, that trauma response pattern in the body always is going to lead to some disease because of the disease process. The trauma response, more than anything else, increases the amount of oxidative stress around our cells and inside of our cells. And not only inside of our cells, but actually around our DNA, which then causes epigenetic triggers and changes the methylation, changes the gene expression of our DNA. So it's only a matter of time between when we start experiencing these patterns of going into overwhelm, that disease is going to show up, because that's literally what it tells our body to do.
Wow, I'm just saying there's so much information here. So if people are listening and they're going, oh my gosh, maybe that's what I have going on, like, where do they even start?
Yeah.
Like,
So
to stop this, you know?
just make it stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you that it's actually not going to therapy. There are things that you need to do before you go to therapy that if you don't do it ahead of time, you'll actually probably cause another trauma response in your body because your body is not ready to open things up. And I already told you kind of the triggers for that trauma response, one of them being too much, too fast. And that's exactly what can happen in therapy. We go too much, too fast, too deep, too fast. And so that's actually not where we start. Where we have to start, what that trauma response needs is safety. In all, there's three things that trauma response needs: safety, energy, and then time. And so that's where the biology piece comes in, because we can bring energy into the system. We can identify where the energy drains are in the system and start to plug the holes. But that safety and actually having a felt sense of safety. Most of us have not had that. We haven't realized that we haven't had that because that's just been our norm. But we have looked to other people to provide that felt sense of safety for us, and we haven't had it. And so we keep complaining, and I would say that might even be another form of trauma that we've experienced, is perceiving that life is hard and not giving us what we need. And so one of the first things that I teach all of my patients and clients is you have to learn how to create a felt sense of safety for yourself. And I teach them some very, very basic somatic experiencing exercises to do just that. Bring in that felt sense of safety.
This is amazing. You have a bunch of different programs for this. Can you talk about what type of things you offer people?
So the place to start is the 21-day journey. And the whole first week, I teach 7 different exercises that they need to know for creating a felt sense of safety. And that way they can start to address that trauma response that is playing out in their body. But the stress response, because as soon as the body starts coming out of a trauma response, it goes into stress. It doesn't go into parasympathetic. It goes back into stress where it came from. The stress response doesn't need safety. The stress response needs support. Because if someone had your back, you're able to put up with a lot more stress than if no one has your back. And so we actually need to bring in a felt sense of support. And yes, I teach people how to create a felt sense of support for themselves so that they're not depending on someone else and then feeling the lack thereof. I don't have anybody else. No one else can do this. So it's like, yeah, we don't want to put our mental health and our physical health in someone else's hands like that. Let me teach you how to actually create a felt sense of support for yourself in your body. And then the third week of the 21-day journey, now this is where they're landing back in that parasympathetic, because we've given the trauma response what it needs, safety, the stress response what it needs, support. Now it's in that, okay, I think I'm in parasympathetic. And what we need to learn is how to stay there. So there's this window of tolerance, and we need to learn how to keep things manageable because we're so used to going into places that are unmanageable, too high of stress, too much overwhelm. And so we teach exercises on how to access joy, how to express healthy anger, boundaries, how to titrate experiences so that you're tapping into emotions, but not too deep that you lose control necessarily. And so this gives them the tools then that they can start navigating more of life, more of the world, even other therapy processes if they want, and be able to do it in a safe way. We call that safe expansion. So all in all, like those are the 3 steps that any person needs to be able to slowly walk themselves out of this trauma response pattern in their life: safety, support, and then expansion.
You know what it makes me think about is as we evolved as humans, where in our lives, I'm assuming it's something with modern day times, where did things go wrong that now we have this trauma response? Like I'm sure when we were like cavemen, that would be something that would not stick around and affect our lives and cause disease, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can look at how life is now and see how our whole life, our whole society is designed to start programming this trauma response very early in our life, even from how we do births. And, that can be overwhelming. That can be too much too fast for babies being born. And then babies are experiencing that trauma response. And then how do we take care of our babies? Well, we're set up as a society where people have to go back to work pretty soon. And so now we're having to pass babies on to people that they don't know. They're not ready for that. They still need everything familiar, everything consistent. That's their safety. And so our whole society is at such a fast pace that things happen way too fast, right? Way too fast. We don't take care of ourselves. And so there are many instances where we're running into too little of something that I need for just too long, too little of support, too little of nurture, too little of touch, too little of healthy food, too little of exercise, whatever it is. And it's just been too long that we've been going that way. And then with how we raise our children, it's just built into our society that we overwhelm them with so many things. We overwhelm them with toys. We overwhelm them with screen time. We overwhelm them with people. Like, it's just fascinating to see the society and the way that we are just have become used to living our life is actually promoting trauma responses pretty early in life.
But this sounds great that you have an answer that we can like reset ourselves and kind of get back to normal. So where can people find out more about you?
They can head over to the website traumahealingaccelerated.com. They can search for me, Dr. Amy, Biology of Trauma, and that will get them there as well. And at that website, traumahealingaccelerated.com, they can find additional resources. I have some guides on there. They can see more of this 21-day journey and what that journey into their nervous system might be for them.
This has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today. I really appreciate it. And it's so fascinating. I can't wait to look into this more.
Thank you, Dr.
All right, everybody, go check out that website. And don't forget, while you're there, after you check out Dr. Amy, go to wytv7.org, check out our other programs, and hit that donate button, because every dollar that you donate helps to support community events and scholarships, and also bringing great programs like this to you today. And tune in again next week for Body, Mind, Spirit.